My name is Ted Smith. I'm the president of the International Hempology 101 Society. And this month, we celebrated our 20th year of activism in Victoria, British Columbia. And as part of this celebration, or ongoing celebrations, I thought to share stories each week for my blogs that we put on the cannabisdigest.ca. And so rather than write them, it seemed better to tell the stories. And so it's something that we have very little documentation of what I'm about to say, because it was back in the day when there was virtually no internet and few cameras. And so I wish that I had the pictures and proof of these things, but there are people walking around with this life experience. And so as I said, we started 20 years ago, and I began doing any number of things at the time, but the main focus was weekly Wednesday evening meetings at 7 o'clock. We'd gather somewhere in Victoria and usually just get in a big circle, smoke pot while I talked, but sometimes we do special events. And so for our 5th anniversary, we actually wanted to make a really big deal of it. And so we actually gathered at 4:20 in Beacon Hill Park as an extra special day, because we wanted to march around town through the afternoon before our regular meeting at 7. And so we started at 4:20 and we marched to the legislature, where elderly lady Betty Crawwick was protesting the provincial government and how they were allowing deforestation to just ruin our environment. And so she was actually literally camped out on the front steps of the Parliament at the time. And so we swung by and had a little rally, and she actually spoke to the crowd quite eloquently, which was really wonderful. And then we marched on to City Hall and left Betty there by herself, and got to City Hall and did a little talk there, and then turned to go back to Beacon Hill Park, where I had arranged for the pot cookies to show up at 7. This was when I was somewhat more radical and would actually make pot cookies and sell them for $1 a piece at the Hempology meetings. And that was a different era, for sure. Again, this was September 2000 that I was doing all this. And so when we were marching to Beacon Hill, we veered off to the BC Museum, because I had discovered that the 21st annual Crimestoppers convention was happening that week, and it was in the middle of it. And this was, again, a really intense year. The battle in Seattle and other global protests were occurring at the time. And the Crimestoppers group was quite sensitive to that and had most of their events on private property at the Empress. But I had dug up and discovered that they were actually having a supper kind of luncheon at the museum, which is public property. And so when we were veering off Douglas Street to go to the museum, the police actually took off, and we were left with no escort at all. Ironically, the police were going to arrest Betty on the front steps of the legislature. They all had to go there for this little old lady, and they left about 100 of us at the museum. And it was quite funny. The security were completely unprepared for us. I'll never forget their looks on their faces. Who would think that a bunch of potheads would show up at a police convention? And again, there were 700 police officers from around the world, some of the top kind of think cops and people trying to get you to turn in your neighbor for any number of things they may be up to. And so, you know, really a very intense group of police officers there. And so they weren't ready for us, though. And the security guards came out, and, you know, I explained to them what we were doing. And at first they tried to deny that there was even a police event there. And so while they were telling me that, other people started reading the name tags of people going into the event, and they'd be like, "Oh, Ted, this one's a cop. Oh, this one's a cop." And finally they conceded that yes, it was a police convention, but they asked me to leave because it was public property. And they said public property the second time. I'm like, well, this is public property, right? Like you said, we're allowed here, you know. And so and then, you know, I said, look, like, really, we don't want to stay here for long. You know, we got a meeting happening in, like, you know, 20 minutes or so in the park. So, you know, let me just plug in my amplifier to tell everyone we're going to leave. So the security guards, oh yeah, do that. So I plug in my amplifier, turned around to the crowd, and was like, hey everybody, welcome to the 5th anniversary of Hempology 101, which was awesome. Everybody gave a big cheer. Apparently behind me, he just puts his head down and just walked into the building. So when I looked around my shoulder the next minute, he's gone. So it's like, okay, well, let's go. And I just got into a little rant about Crimestoppers and how turning in your neighbors for growing a few plants is a crime itself, and that it's really disgusting what they try and do. And so it's something that I got into a little rant, and then all of a sudden, I guess the camera guy from Check 6 had snuck through the crowd, and all of a sudden, bam, I'm on TV. So got back into the spiel, welcome to the 5th anniversary of Hempology 101, and said a little bit. And when I do my public talks, I have this little voice in the back of my head, telling me to, what I got to think about next, or asking me what some guy's doing over there, whatever, right? But the little voice in the back of my head was telling me, look, like, you need a punchline, Ted. What's the punchline? So it just came out of me. We at Hempology 101 want Crimestoppers to know that we think they are scum. Dead quiet. The whole group just, and then this big cheer, yeah! So of course, top news that night was Betty's getting arrested, and Hempology thinks Crimestoppers are scum. And so that was the end of the press conference. It's like, okay, let's go. Headed off to Beacon Hill Park. The really ironic thing about the night was that we actually, after I sold the pot cookies and had my normal Hempology, we actually played Capture the Flag in Beacon Hill Park in downtown Victoria. Our one and only time ever doing it. And it's a beautiful place, but around 1 o'clock I was going around this one building near the petting zoo and didn't look and stepped into a pond that's full of duck scum right up to about here. And I remember thinking to myself in this pond, who's the scum now, buddy? Who's the scum now? And so it was a wonderful night. Honestly, that didn't ruin it by any means, but it was an adventure for all of us. Like they say, 100, 120 that ended up being there for the entire time. And one of many evenings that we had, again, back in, this was September 2000, that are wonderful to share, and I wish we had more documentation of it, but I have my stories, and you can join us next week on YouTube and see the next one. Have a great day, and smoke with God.